Zlatan Ibrahimovic didn't play football, he ruled a kingdom. In a sport defined by rules, he was the exception. He threatened to break his own captain's legs in the locker room. He sent Marco Materazzi to the hospital as an act of revenge 4 years in the making. And when he arrived in England at age 34, critics said he was too old, too slow, and too arrogant. But they forgot one thing: lions don't compare themselves to humans. Why were the toughest defenders in the Premier League terrified to mark a man who was nearly retired? Was it his taekwondo black belt? Or was it the psychological warfare he waged before the whistle even blew? Today we expose the dark arts of the man who looked Eric Cantona in the eye and said, "I won't be king, I will be God." To understand the sheer magnitude of Zlatan's psychological dominance, we have to rewind to the summer of 2016. Manchester United, the most famous club in the world, was a fallen giant. They were wandering in the wilderness following the departure of Sir Alex Ferguson, desperate for a savior. Into this vacuum stepped a 34-year-old Swedish striker who walked with the swagger of a heavyweight champion. But before he even kicked a ball, the hierarchy of Old Trafford was challenged. Eric Cantona, the undisputed king of United's history, offered Zlatan a welcome message that doubled as a warning. He told the press, "You can be the prince if you want to, and the number 7 shirt is yours if you are interested. This is my welcome gift to you. The king is gone, long live the prince." Most players would be honored to be anointed as the heir to such a legacy. Zlatan was insulted. His response to the Swedish paper Aftonbladet was not a soundbite, it was a declaration of war. He said, "I admire Cantona, and I heard what he said, but I won't be king of Manchester. I will be God of Manchester." It is a sentence that teeters on the edge of insanity. Has there ever been a 34-year-old player who dared to walk into the most physically demanding league on earth and declare himself a deity? Was it pure narcissism? Was it delusion? Or did Zlatan Ibrahimovic know something that we didn't? This video will prove that Zlatan wasn't crazy. He was the only real person left in a world of media-trained athletes. His arrogance was a calculated weapon, a psychological armor forged in the ghettos of Sweden to protect a boy who had nothing. But to understand the god, we must first fear the fighter. Up next, we analyze the specific moments of violence that defined his career, from the revenge kick that broke a rival's ribs to the threats that silenced his own teammates, and reveal why Zlatan's greatest skill wasn't scoring goals, but instilling terror. To defenders across Europe, Zlatan Ibrahimovic wasn't just a striker, he was a physical threat. In the modern game, players are protected by cameras, referees, and strict rules against violent conduct. But Zlatan played as if those rules were mere suggestions. He brought a combat mentality to the football pitch that was rooted not in the academy, but in the dojo. Zlatan is a black belt in taekwondo, and he used that skill set not just to score acrobatic goals, but to weaponize his body against anyone who disrespected him. The most brutal example of this dark art occurred during the Milan derby in November 2010. Zlatan, then playing for AC Milan, found himself face-to-face with Marco Materazzi, the Inter Milan defender famous for provoking Zinedine Zidane into a headbutt. Materazzi was a bully, a player who made a career out of hurting forwards. But Zlatan had a long memory. 4 years earlier, Materazzi had injured Zlatan with a nasty tackle. Zlatan didn't complain to the press. He waited. In the second half of the derby, the moment arrived. Zlatan saw Materazzi approaching. He didn't brace for impact. He launched an attack. Using a taekwondo move, Zlatan jumped and drove his studs into Materazzi's chest with the force of a battering ram. It wasn't a tackle. It was an execution. Materazzi collapsed and was sent to the hospital. Years later, in an interview with GQ, Zlatan recounted the incident with a chilling lack of remorse. He said, "I waited for him for 4 years to send him to the hospital. That is the beauty of the game." This quote reveals the gravity of his psychology. Zlatan doesn't view football as a sport. He views it as a blood feud. He operates on a code of street justice where a debt of pain must be repaid with interest. For defenders, this knowledge is terrifying. It means that if you tackle Zlatan today, he might not react immediately, but he will remember. And 3 seasons from now, when you least expect it, he will come for you. But his aggression wasn't reserved only for the opposition. Zlatan demanded total submission from everyone, including his own captains. During his time at Ajax in the early 2000s, Zlatan clashed with Rafael van der Vaart, the darling of Dutch football and the team's captain. Van der Vaart accused Zlatan of intentionally injuring him during an international match between Sweden and the Netherlands. Most young players would apologize to their captain to keep the peace. Zlatan did the opposite. In a dressing room confrontation that has become legendary, Zlatan stood over van der Vaart and delivered a threat so specific it silenced the room. He reportedly said, "I didn't do it on purpose, and you know that. But if you accuse me again, I will break both of your legs, and that time it will be on purpose." This wasn't bluster, it was a promise. Zlatan established a hierarchy where he sat at the top regardless of who wore the armband. He used fear to strip Van der Vaart of his authority. He showed the squad that titles didn't matter, power mattered, and Zlatan was the most powerful man in the room. This mastery of psychological warfare reached its zenith in the twilight of his career during a Coppa Italia match in 2021 against Romelu Lukaku. Lukaku was in the form of his life a physical beast who was carrying Inter Milan to the title. He was the only player in Italy who could physically match Zlatan. When the two giants clashed, heads pressed together like rutting stags, Zlatan didn't just shout insults. He went for the soul. He reportedly whispered to Lukaku, "Go do your voodoosh asterisk to you little donkey." To the uninitiated, this sounded like a bizarre, perhaps racist insult, but Zlatan knew exactly what he was doing. He was referencing a specific insecurity from Lukaku's past, a story about Lukaku's mother receiving a voodoo message advising him to leave Everton. By bringing up voodoo and his mother, Zlatan wasn't just trash-talking, he was hacking Lukaku's mind. He knew it would trigger an explosion. And it did. Lukaku lost control, screaming at Zlatan, completely distracted from the game. Inter won the match, but Zlatan won the psychological war. He proved that even at 39 years old, he could dismantle a rival without touching the ball. This is the dark art of Zlatan. He identifies the weakness in his opponent, whether it's Materazzi's aggression, Van der Vaart's pride, or Lukaku's family, and he exploits it ruthlessly. But if he treats his enemies with disdain, how does he treat his friends? The locker room stories about Zlatan are even more bizarre. They paint a picture of a man who ruled not just through fear, but through acts of physical dominance that bordered on bullying. Up next, we go inside the dressing room to witness the moment Zlatan picked up a World Cup winner and threw him into a trash can. We explore his conflicts with Pep Guardiola, the only man he couldn't intimidate, and how his refusal to be a good employee cost him the Champions League but cemented his legend as the untamable lion. If Zlatan Ibrahimovic was a nightmare for his opponents, he was a complicated reality for his teammates. In the locker room, a sacred space usually reserved for camaraderie and equality, Zlatan did not seek friendship. He sought submission. He established a hierarchy where he was the apex predator, and everyone else, regardless of their medal count or reputation, was prey. Nothing illustrates this dominance better than the story involving Gennaro Gattuso during their time together at AC Milan. Gattuso, known as the Rhino, was widely considered the scariest man in football. He was a World Cup winner who choked coaches and tackled opponents for fun. He was the one player nobody messed with. Nobody except Zlatan. As Thiago Silva later recounted in an interview with Sky Sports, the incident began innocently enough during a training session. Gattuso spent the morning teasing Zlatan, poking the bear, trying to get a rise out of the new star. Zlatan said nothing. He didn't laugh. He didn't argue. He waited. When they returned to the dressing room, Zlatan walked over to Gattuso. Without saying a word, he grabbed the Italian hard man, a man who terrified the rest of Serie A, lifted him entirely off the ground, and flipped him upside down into a large trash can. The room froze. Gattuso, legs flailing, couldn't get out. The message was brutal in its simplicity. You might be a monster to them, but you are a toy to me. It wasn't just a prank. It was a physical assertion of rank. By manhandling the team's enforcer, Zlatan proved that there was no one he couldn't dominate. He turned the hardest man in the squad into a punchline. This story circulated through the football world, reinforcing the myth that Zlatan wasn't just a skilled player. He was a physical anomaly who could crush you if he chose to. But while Zlatan could throw his weight around in Italy, his time in Spain revealed a different kind of conflict. At Barcelona, he met the only man he couldn't intimidate physically because the man held the keys to his career, Pep Guardiola. The collision between Zlatan Ibrahimovic and Pep Guardiola is the greatest clash of philosophies in modern football. Guardiola represented the system, the idea that the team is a machine and every player is a cog who must behave, dress, and play identically. Zlatan represented the individual, the belief that the star is bigger than the system. Upon arriving at Barcelona, Zlatan was told by Guardiola that players were not allowed to drive luxury sports cars to the training ground. It was a rule designed to keep the players humble, to make them look like good working-class boys. To Zlatan, a man who had clawed his way out of poverty and bought his Ferraris as trophies of his survival, this was an insult. It was an attempt to erase his identity. His response was an act of pure rebellion. The next day, Zlatan didn't drive a club-sponsored Audi. He drove his limited edition Ferrari Enzo, one of only 400 in the world, and parked it right in front of the entrance to the training facility. It was a middle finger raised in the face of authority. The tension exploded after a Champions League semi-final against Inter Milan. Zlatan, feeling marginalized and disrespected by a manager who refused to look him in the eye, lost control in the dressing room. In his autobiography, I Am Zlatan, he describes the moment he screamed at the most successful manager in the world. He didn't attack Guardiola's tactics, he attacked his manhood. "You have no balls," Zlatan shouted. "You are shitting yourself in front of Mourinho. You can go to hell." He then kicked a metal equipment box across the room. To most players, screaming at your boss is professional suicide. To Zlatan, it was a necessary defense of his ego. He viewed Guardiola as a coward who wanted schoolboys, who would obey orders, not men who would challenge him. Zlatan refused to be a Ferrari driven like a Fiat. This conflict cost him a Champions League title with Barcelona. It forced his exit from the best team in the world after just one season. But it also cemented his legend. It proved that Zlatan Ibrahimovic could not be tamed. He would rather leave the biggest stage on earth than compromise who he was. He wasn't an employee. He was an independent contractor who operated under his own laws. This refusal to bow down to authority, whether it was a captain like Van der Vaart or a manager like Guardiola, is what terrified defenders. When you mark a player who doesn't respect the rules of his own club, you know he certainly won't respect the rules of the game when he deals with you. But where does this God complex come from? Is it just arrogance, or is it a shield? To find the source of this unshakable self-belief, we have to leave the stadiums of Europe and go back to the gray concrete estates of Malmö, Sweden. We have to go back to Rosengard. Up next, we uncover the origin story of the God. We look at the poverty, the stolen bicycles, and the immigrant outsider status that forged Zlatan's mentality. We reveal why the boy who had nothing grew up to be the man who demanded everything, and why his arrogance is actually the ultimate survival mechanism. To understand why a 34-year-old man would walk into Old Trafford and declare himself God, you have to realize that Zlatan Ibrahimovic has been fighting a war for legitimacy since the day he was born. He didn't grow up in the postcard perfect version of Sweden with its red cottages and polite society. He grew up in Rosengard, a concrete ghetto in Malmö, populated by immigrants, refugees, and the forgotten working class. He was the son of a Bosnian Muslim father and a Croatian Catholic mother who separated when he was young. In a country that values conformity and silence, Zlatan was loud, different, and unmistakably other. He didn't look like the blonde Swedish boys. He didn't speak like them. He was an outsider in his own birth country. His childhood was defined by a specific gnawing hunger. His fridge was often empty. His father struggled with alcoholism, and his mother worked grueling hours as a cleaner to keep a roof over their heads. Zlatan didn't have a ride to practice. He had to steal bicycles just to get to the training ground. He became a thief, not out of malice, but out of necessity. He stole to survive and he stole to play. This environment forged the God complex. Psychologists often note that children who feel invisible or inferior will construct a grandiose persona to protect themselves. Zlatan's arrogance wasn't a flaw, it was armor. It was a shield he built to deflect the racism, the poverty, and the doubt. When he shouted, "I am the best," he wasn't trying to convince the world. He was trying to convince himself. He had to be a lion because if he was a lamb, Rosengard would have eaten him alive. When he arrived at Manchester United in 2016, the British press saw an aging mercenary looking for one last payday. They didn't see the boy who had stolen bikes. They underestimated his hunger. Zlatan treated the Premier League not as a retirement home, but as the final boss in a video game he had already mastered. He scored 28 goals that season. He carried the team on his back. He won trophies. But the true test of his divinity came when his body finally broke. In April 2017, Zlatan suffered a horrific double cruciate ligament injury. His knee buckled backward. Doctors said his career was over. At 35, nobody comes back from that. But lions don't recover like humans. Zlatan refused to accept the diagnosis. He attacked his rehab with a savagery that terrified his physical therapists. 7 months later, he was back on the pitch. He had conquered biology, just as he had conquered poverty. When asked how he recovered so quickly, he didn't thank the doctors. He said, "Lions don't recover like humans." It sounds like a joke, but it is the core philosophy of his life. He refuses to be bound by the laws that govern normal people. Zlatan Ibrahimovic is the only player in history who could turn arrogance into a virtue. He taught us that believing in yourself, even to the point of delusion, is the most powerful weapon you can have. He forced the world to bend to his will. He forced the defenders to fear him, not because he was the fastest, but because he was the one who believed with absolute certainty that he was superior. He retired from football in 2023 at the age of 41, leaving the game on his own terms in a stadium full of people chanting his name. The boy from Rosengard who stole bikes had stolen the heart of the football world. He leaves behind a legacy that is unique. He wasn't the humble genius like Messi, and he wasn't the manufactured machine like Ronaldo. He was Zlatan, a raw, chaotic, beautiful force of nature who proved that you don't have to be a good boy to be a legend. You just have to be undeniable. So I leave you with this final question, a choice between humility and dominance. Do you view Zlatan Ibrahimovic as an arrogant bully who made everything about himself, or do you see him as the ultimate inspirational leader who proved that confidence is the key to conquering the world? If you were a manager, would you want a player who calls himself God in your dressing room? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this deep dive gave you a new perspective on the psychology of the game's greatest characters, please like and subscribe to The Dark Side of Football. We will continue to uncover the stories of the players who refuse to follow the rules. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. Thank you.